Zoom right now. And I think it says we're live, but let's double check.
I think we're live.
Do you see it on your profile? Oh yeah, I got your notification. So
Yes.
it looks like we are.
Oh, I'm live. For context, for everyone tuning in, I've asked Emily like 5 times in the last 3 minutes if we're live yet.
That's why we're late. Yeah. We spent the last no. I'm actually really excited to have this chat with you. And we actually got our blankets, and you have some coffee.
It's tea. It's even cozier than coffee.
Oh,
I may work at Espresso, but I drink tea.
Because you cut out coffee completely, right?
I did, yeah. I've cheated a few times since I tweeted that. I tweeted this like a month ago. I've had maybe 1 or 2 cups of caffeinated coffee since then. Would not recommend. Like, once you cut it out, don't go back. Because the jitters, the bouncing off the wall, the latent feeling of anxiety as the caffeine hits, it's actually counterproductive at this point. So yeah, I'm all about the tea. Sometimes decaf coffee.
I had the opposite. I did like a 7-day cold turkey, no coffee, because I realized I was addicted. And day 2 and day 3, I had like awful headaches. Yeah. And then on day 7, I was like, okay, let's give this a shot. And I felt amazing. It was like, you know, the movie Limitless.
The best time.
Yeah.
Movie Limitless. That's a great reference.
But great. I actually drink mainly matcha these days too. I'm just trying to manage the caffeine levels a bit.
Matcha is a nice kind of balance to it, I think. It's because of the L-theanine in it. Do you know about L-theanine?
Yeah, it calms you down. So it's like a nice balance to the caffeine.
I think of it as kind of like this CBD to the THC. It's like the thing that calms you back down. Matcha has its own like inbuilt calming mechanism, L-theanine.
Yeah, that's kind of like me when I'm scrolling through Twitter and I'm just seeing all of the infra wars fighting happening, and I have my blanket with me. That's like that's my balance to
security
everything
blanket. Is it a weighted blanket, Emily?
No, I do have a weighted blanket in my bedroom, and that's been amazing. So yeah, the key for that is get like 10% of your body weight. And then also dose with magnesium before you sleep. And
okay, 10% sounds reasonable. I have a 25-pound weighted blanket.
Whoa.
I am not 250 pounds. So this is more than 10% of my body weight. And it's a little too much. To the point where, like, at some point I wasn't using it and I went to put it away in the closet and I literally could not, like, lift it over my head to get it up on the high shelf. I had to get my husband to come help me. So that's a good rule of thumb, 10%.
25 is a lot. That's it sounds like you are cozy maxing, which I'm fully for.
I am cozy.
Maybe there is a limit.
Yeah. Yeah. I've taken the cozy too far, perhaps.
I just dropped their link to the Crypto Marketing Cabal if anyone wants to hop in. But where I want to start, because Jill, I usually see you talking about interop. I see you talking about inflation and Bitcoin and crypto, but I don't think I've ever seen you talk or tweet about your proudest work, which according to your website is your undergrad research on religion as propaganda in ancient Rome.
Yes.
So can you just explain to me what this research was about? I just want to, I want to hear about how did they use religion? How did they use it as propaganda? Is it still happening today?
It's not still happening today. Not that I know of, anyway. I don't think people are still worshiping like the Emperor Augustus. But yeah, as an undergrad, I studied classics, which a lot of people mistakenly think means I spent a lot of time reading like Oliver Twist and, you know, classic literature. No, classics means I spent a lot of time reading Latin and ancient Greek. And you know the meme of like, oh, like for every man, the Roman Empire lives rent free in his head. Like all men are always thinking about the Roman Empire. That's like actually me. I do spend a lot of time to this day thinking about the Roman Empire. That was certainly pretty much all I thought about during undergraduate. There was a time where I thought that I wanted to pursue it into the real world and become an academic who again, literally spent all day. Yes, shout out classic studies. But no, I realized pretty quickly that it was not going to be super practical. And so I followed my passion for economics into the real world, and then fell down the crypto rabbit hole. But yeah, in undergrad, this is what I did. I had to, well, I didn't have to, I guess I was a nerd who chose to and volunteered to do a senior research study. And I wrote my thesis on, it's called The Gods and Governors of the Roman Empire. I think what fascinated me was that, I mean, it goes for so many ancient empires, but certainly for Rome, they governed this vast swath of land, basically stretching from, at times even bumping up against sort of modern day India, sort of Southeast Asia region, all the way up through England, modern day England. And how do you keep that many people in that diverse of location and regions with what they had as, you know, the terrible infrastructure for travel and correspondence and communication? How do you keep them all on the same page? How do they even know that they're a part of the Roman Empire?
There was no Twitter back then.
There was definitely no Twitter back then. No. And so, yeah, that was kind of what fascinated me and what pulled me in. I'm cringing a little bit because this is not like real academic work. I never published this thesis in a peer-reviewed publication or anything like that, but it was a lot of work. I had to learn like 5 different languages in order to do it. And yeah, it is, I would say it is still some of my proudest work. So yeah, thank you for bringing it up, Emily. I'm happy.
I want to actually learn more about it. So, okay, they had no Twitter, no internet. They had all of this land. So how did they instill control? And I guess, how did they spread the gospel or all of the deities?
Yeah. So it's interesting. You know, even going into working on this thesis, so I'd, you know, been studying the Roman Empire for several years at that point, 2-3 years. I had this notion that religion in ancient times in general, and certainly in the Roman Empire, was conceived of sort of the way that we think of religion today, of like, okay, there's the economic part of my life where I work, and there's like the personal part of my life where I'm at home with family, and then there's maybe the spiritual, like religious part of my life. But they didn't really think of it that way. Religion was just sort of all intermixed with everything, and religion actually was approached in a very practical way, in a way that Christianity came along, and Judaism, of course, came along before that and took a very different approach, where there was a lot more sort of emphasis on spirituality and like your internal life. But Roman religion was not really like that. And one of the ways in which religion was deployed in a very practical way was by the ruling class, by the emperors and by their governors who governed all of these regions, the far-flung regions of the empire, in order to leverage religion to placate people, to keep them aligned. Alignment is obviously a big thing that we talk about in our industry, in crypto, but to keep them aligned with back at home, the center of Rome, and aligned with what the emperor was doing. So it was a very different approach to religion. And religion was in many ways pretty overtly used as propaganda. So a couple of examples of this that I'm just remembering that I think are really interesting is there are a lot of examples of the Roman emperor who, you know, maybe knew nothing about like the local gods of Britannia or the local gods of Egypt, like Isis and Osiris, or didn't care about them, right? Or maybe even thought that they were kind of BS, like, okay, these gods don't really exist. They would still foster those local cults, is what they get called in kind of the academic study of this. So there's a lot of examples of Roman emperors sponsoring and giving money to local cults around Isis and Osiris and these kind of Egyptian gods who, again, like they as the emperor didn't necessarily buy into, but they could see that it was going to make the people of Egypt happy. Maybe it would even make the people of Egypt happy to start to see their religion spread outside of Egypt. And so like if an Egyptian envoy was going to come to Rome and they would see a temple of Isis, like this was something that the emperor was generally across the emperors across ages up until we get to the point where Christianity kicks in, they were totally down with this. So it's a very different way of thinking about religion from our modern conception of it. Again, a lot of our modern conception comes from, I think, like being sort of people of the book. So whether it's Christian or Jewish or Muslim, where we think of there as being only one true God. We're a monotheistic faith. The Romans were kind of like, oh, like everyone can have their own gods. Like it's a party up in here. We'll sponsor your local temple, like whatever makes you all happy. But then brilliantly, the emperors very frequently would insert themselves into these local cults. So if you go to Egypt, actually, I mean, obviously there's like the ancient temples from like 5,000 years ago, which it precedes any of this. But if you look at the local temples from about 2,000 years ago in Egypt, so around the time that the Roman Empire became a thing, there's all of these images of Augustus and like the prominent Roman emperors on the walls of these temples, sometimes put in after the fact, you know, looking like pharaohs. But yeah, they're sort of subtly inserting themselves into the local cults. And so I think that it's like a brilliant example of sort of how you can leverage religion or belief in general. It doesn't have to be religion, because again, it wasn't thought of really like that back then, in order to drive buy-in and alignment and all of those things that you need to make any system work.
So it sounds like it's not that they're creating net new stories or net new religions, but when they're spreading or growing the empire, they're seeing the existing beliefs or religions and deities there and just saying like, yes, we support, and getting buy-in that way.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's kind of like crypto community building, right? Like
yes,
one of your Discord community members makes an amazing meme and then you just proliferate it and excited, and they just make more memes, and then now suddenly there's a net new narrative.
Exactly. Well, I think that there's a really interesting parallel here, and we'll talk about it in terms of crypto, but again, you could apply this probably to lots of different industries, lots of different domains. But you know, Ethereum was sort of the OG L1, right? That came along and had smart contract capabilities. Of course, it came after Bitcoin, whatever. And then if I think about the prominent L1s that arose after Ethereum, they took one of two paths. They were either very Ethereum friendly and Ethereum aligned and sort of saying like, yeah, like we can all coexist and like we'll take some of the good stuff from Ethereum. You guys are welcome to borrow from us. And like, you know, we'll all be, yeah, sort of coexisting peacefully. And that was a brilliant strategy. Cosmos, I think, did this really well. Where like Cosmos invested super heavily, I recall it must have been 2017 or something like that, 2018 maybe, having like this big event and booth and whatever at DevCon, which like DevCon is an Ethereum event, and yet there's Cosmos introducing their local deities, I guess, to the Ethereum crowd. Again, brilliant, because if Ethereum is the dominant ecosystem, it doesn't alienate Ethereum. It doesn't present sort of like a conflicting vision. It's sort of like we can all do this together. So that's a bit like what most of the Roman emperors did. And most of like the local Roman religions did. They were like happy to coexist with all of this. Then on the flip side, you have other projects in crypto like Solana who came along and said, okay, no, like we are an ETH killer. Like we do not coexist. We are not friendly. We have fundamentally different values, and only one chain is going to win. And that's a bit like the monotheism, I would say, of Christianity that ultimately came along. Like the Romans did not know what to do with Christianity. They thought that this was this like weird little cult, an offshoot of Judaism. Like the Romans had conflicts with the Jews in part because of this, in part because of like the conflict between monotheism, but the Christians really were out there for them. They were like this some like weird hippie offshoot cult of Judaism. Like, I guess we're like not going to worry about it, but they're like pretty antagonistic towards us. So they're saying that there's only one God, and this dude who our local governor like crucified. Now there's all of these issues. But the brilliance of Christianity, as history tells us, is that they were so dogmatic and like ran so counter to kind of the prevailing notions, like all of this can coexist. And it was a risky strategy, but it paid off. And I would say Solana maybe is kind of a similar parallel here. Like they are monotheistic, sort of dogmatic crowd relative.
I mean, I'm wondering, like, going back to ancient Rome and back then, so I'm imagining that there's many different religions at the time before Christianity was introduced. And it makes sense because I'm assuming back then there was less access to all of the information we have now. Like there's a overabundance of information and different narratives you can tap into. And I want to talk about that as well because, you know, Bitcoin in a sense is a religion of this was sovereign money,
Sure.
but also that is changing too as there's new products or projects building on top of Bitcoin that are essentially unlocking new things that you can do with Bitcoin. And maybe it's not just sovereign, it can also be like sovereign security for the things that Ethereum or alt VMs are doing. But going back to ancient Rome, is it possible, would it have been possible for that to be sustained if they had the internet back then? Because I'm imagining they're in their own little cult or their own little village, town, whatever the case is. They have their temple. Were they very mobile and moving around and experiencing other religions?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. I think that it would have caused major problems for, you know, for example, like this far-flung Roman province on sort of the western border of the empire, i.e., like, for example, Britain, to have known what was going on in the far-flung Roman province on the eastern border of the empire, where like the Romans, and sort of when I say the Romans, I mean like the central hub of the emperor, for so long, they were so good at sort of using fragmentation and isolation to their advantage of like, all right, like, you know, the folks over here will placate them and keep them happy by giving them bread and circus and sponsoring their local deities. And they don't even need to know that we're, you know, expending double the budget on these like competitor sort of practices or deities, etc., over on this other half of the empire. I think that it was very unique to the time. The main avenues of correspondence and the primary folks who would travel around were really kind of the ruling class. So the emperors would have all of these local governors who they installed in all of their provinces. And most of our modern understanding of how Rome was governed comes from the correspondence exchanged between the emperor and his governors. And this spans hundreds of years across time. So we can see how things evolved, how each emperor kind of had their own different style. One thing that was interesting that came up in the course of my research is that there's always kind of this tension where the governors, especially in the early days of the empire, so this was under kind of Augustus, Tiberius, sort of like the first couple emperors who were all considered good emperors and sort of, you know, like golden ages flourished under them. I'll relate this back to crypto actually again in a second. They were very hesitant to call themselves emperors. So the first emperor, Augustus, he did not call himself emperor. He did not use the word imperator or dominus. Like he would not call himself like master or anything like that. he called himself, excuse me, princeps or princeps civitates, which is like the first citizen. So he was very much trying to be sort of like below the radar. The reason for this is that the Romans historically had been very anti-monarchical. They were very anti-king, very anti-authoritarianism, very pro-democracy. The period preceding the first emperor was called the Roman Republic. The Republic came about after the overthrow of kings, like 700 years prior. So this is their own ancient history, but it was very important lore for everyone who'd lived in the intervening time period that like we're not a monarchy. Those kings came in, messed everything up. They were super corrupt. They're raping people's wives, like all kinds of issues. We're a republic. So absolutely brilliant. The first Roman emperor was like, all right, like it's not going to go over well if I call myself an emperor here. So I'm just the princeps, which was a word actually that was used to describe like the leader of the Roman Senate during the Republic when they were genuinely democratic. So he's like taking words that people are already comfortable with. And he deified Julius Caesar, who came before him. And so like he kind of just said that he was doing that to like pay homage to this amazing leader who preceded him, around whom there was a lot of popular support. But everything he was doing was laying the groundwork for himself to become accepted as this new paradigm, as emperor, as someone who would be deified himself. And it was this brilliant kind of theater that he put on. And he was always very sort of, so bringing this back to the governors and to the religion, kind of propagating it throughout the empire, his governors were always writing to him, and indeed to his predecessors who came after him, being like, oh, like, princeps, like we want to put up a statue of you in the town square where people can leave tribute to you. And, the people of this province, they want to be worshiping you. And he would always be like, oh, like I couldn't possibly, no. But indeed, the governors then would go about it anyway. And it was this sort of like very artfully done dance back and forth where the governors and all of his little minions kind of set him up to be successful in demurring from these things, but then ultimately actually like pushing forward his agenda of being the first emperor and being deified and being this sort of like god level figure. I relate this back to crypto because I think that there's a lot of like theater that happens in crypto where, a lot of projects early on are not actually what they say they are. They're not actually very decentralized, but they know that it's important to pay lip service to these ideals that exist within crypto around decentralization and so forth. And, it's not even clear often like where some of these projects themselves land on the spectrum. Like, are they actually outright rejecting these principles, or are they paying lip service to them with a goal of getting there? Nobody really knows. But I think there's a lot of lessons to be taken from the ultimate master of propaganda.
That's interesting you say that, because as you were telling the story, I was relating it to founder branding and how it's so common that the CEOs or the leader or the face of the protocol or project, they're in the replies on Twitter and they give you access to themselves. But that's actually, you're also correct, where typically things start very centralized and then it's on the roadmap to decentralize or add more nodes over time. But you never actually know, when will it happen? Will it happen, or is it because that's the end state, or is it something else?
I think this is really interesting though about founder branding, where like, and this could go for open source in general, but obviously we'll use crypto as the example. But like, Vitalik, I think for a long time, for the last few years, really has been distancing himself a little bit, right, from whether it's, as I understand it, like some of the operations of the EF, distancing himself a little bit from like the promotion, kind of marketing, which obviously he's getting a lot of flack for now. even a little bit from the roadmap, like leaving that more to kind of the lieutenants of Justin Drake or Donkrod or whoever. And now he's kind of like back with a vengeance. And I mean, there's a lot of things going on there, probably regulatory, like whatever. But it does sort of smack a bit of this like Roman emperor dynamic of like, they're trying not to be the emperor. It's like they're trying to appear as like very hands off. And I don't think Vitalik was like just trying to appear that way. I think he actually genuinely was moving in that direction. But then certainly if there's any kind of crisis or in wartime, and you see this even before the Roman Empire becomes an empire during the Republican period, where like a general will sort of like seize absolute power for a period. And then, of course, like it's up to everyone to trust them to relinquish that and move back to the anti-monarchic approach. But I think the same could be said for a lot of these sort of open source or crypto founders who are these sort of like godlike figures that they don't really want to be, or they definitely don't want to be perceived that way, but they kind of do. Like there's just a lot of conflicts happening.
It's definitely a space where the space is so small. I feel like there's only a handful of people we often see on the timeline, and there's so many personalities and loud personalities as well, and they're all kind of clashing a bit. Going back to the history side of it, so it sounds like at this point in time, ancient Rome is very fragmented, belief-wise at least.
Yeah.
The beliefs and the fragmentation is actually keeping things together and happy, because
Yes.
they all have their own like believe in something or convictions, right?
Yes.
In their own little pockets.
And they don't even need to worry about what's happening on the other side of the world. Like as long as they're doing well right where they are, it's fine.
That's amazing. I'm kind of jealous of that ignorance. I feel like being a marketer,
Me too.
being a marketer, like we are, we've worked with all sorts of ecosystems. It's like to bridge. I need to test every chain. I'm testing everyone's products, and I need to know everything at all times. But you said something interesting. So there was a point in time in history where they're completely fragmented. Then Christianity came in. And again, this is a time period where there's no TV, there's no Twitter, there's no TikTok or IG Reels, there's no StreamYard. How did Christianity do this? Was this just outright fear or violence, or was there something else?
No. I mean, there was some of that. That was more like later, I think, Crusades kind of period. That was like way after where my level of, I wouldn't even call this expertise, but just level of knowledge ends. So yeah, Christianity also played a slow game though. Like obviously Jesus was like 0 to 30 AD, right? And then it wasn't until 300 something AD that we saw a Roman emperor himself convert to Christianity, and that was Constantine. So, a few hundred years. So our plans are literally measured in centuries. Like if you're running a marketing department, don't benchmark yourself against, the 12 disciples. But it really did. It started out as like a word of mouth campaign. There were a lot of martyrdoms that happened. So again, this was actually something that was not normal in the Roman Empire. It was to persecute people for their religion. Like in general, everyone was quite, I wouldn't say tolerant, but just like it was accepted in this universe that all of these deities and gods could coexist. And so like, why would you persecute someone? And it was really because, again, this was a monotheistic faith that the Christians kind of put themselves in this position based on their faith and their beliefs, of course, of being in the crosshairs. And, they would not pay tribute to the emperor, right, as a god, which even though for a long time the emperor himself was saying like, oh, no, I couldn't possibly, like, no, like the local governors especially wanted their people to be paying tribute to the emperor. And so if the Christians aren't doing that, they're going to come after them. And there are these big spectacles around martyrdom, which ultimately totally backfired. Like those spectacles were ways for Christians to evangelize their faith and evangelize like, hey, like maybe your gods have abandoned you. Like maybe they're false gods. Maybe, maybe you shouldn't be paying homage to this guy back in Rome who doesn't actually know who you are. And so there's all of this sort of like political, like really pushing a political and a religious angle here that just went against the grain. And over time, eventually did land with enough people to really catch fire and get traction. But they also very much had it as a goal in mind to go out and evangelize. And like that's a difference from at least my understanding of this period. Again, like I'm only really looking at Roman sources on this stuff, but at least the Roman sources, they talk about the Jews was much less about evangelizing and much more about like the Jews have like their faith and their holy land and like the things that they're doing, and they want to be able to do that, but they're not trying to go out and, at least again during this period, according to Roman sources, they're not trying to go out and really proactively spread the word the way that Christians were. So yeah, it is interesting though to think about Christianity as like one of the most effective marketing campaigns in history.
Yeah, because
good job, guys.
They amazing marketers, truly inspirational for all of us marketers with what they've done. I mean, when I think about early crypto, well, before I even get there, like, how did you go from this? How did you go from this to Goldman Sachs?
I told you before, the liberal arts school thing. I feel like it was just sort of like accepted. I went to Harvard, whatever. I feel like it was kind of accepted that it was possible there to study something kind of random and esoteric and still be able to like make the sellout move and go work in either consulting or banking. I chose the latter, or not even banking. I went to work there as a trader. I don't know. I got a minor in economics and poli-sci, and so that was kind of the connection. I knew like pretty early on that I wasn't actually going to pursue classics at like an academic kind of post-grad level. Although I don't know, I fantasize about someday crypto being in a place where I feel good about it and me going back and doing my own translation of the Aeneid or something. Like maybe someday I'll revisit it. But yeah, I don't know. My parents both worked on Wall Street. It was something I was exposed to growing up. Like CNBC or Bloomberg was always on TV, and I was interested in markets. I did maybe that makes me a bit of a nepo baby here. I don't know, because both my parents worked on Wall Street. Come at me. But I did an internship at Goldman and then got a job there and went to work on Wall Street after.
So what was that jump from TradFi to Bitcoin and crypto like?
Oh, it was a breath of fresh air. It was. So I don't know. I kind of stumbled into Bitcoin. I've told this story like 100 times, so I'll spare you the
details. Because this is also kind of like when a new Roman Empire or emperor is going into a new town and is like,
it's true.
Like, oh yeah, I like this Osiris cult. Let me sponsor this event, and then eventually let me get my carving on the hieroglyphics. So
it is interesting. I mean, this is like mixing classical metaphors, but people often talk about Bitcoin Trojan horsing itself into Wall Street. And like, that definitely wasn't how it felt back then. Like now, of course, Bitcoin is kind of hyper financialized and accepted by Wall Street. Back then, I was definitely amongst kind of the weirdos for taking it seriously, for paying attention to it. There were a couple of other coworkers I had at Goldman who took it really seriously. I remember one guy in particular had this great line that was like, what is Bitcoin being used for today? This was back in like 2013, and it was obviously darknet markets. And he was like, never bet against something that is enabling people to do, I forget if he said like illegal activity or subversive activity, but that was kind of real. That played out. obviously today Bitcoin it's like way worse than cash. If you're going to try and do something illegal, don't do that. Not recommended. Chainalysis or TRM, they'll find you. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of stumbled into the Bitcoin side of things, and I was just like, this is really interesting. This feels way more like the future than the stuff I was doing. I was on a trading desk. We were trading bonds and credit default swaps, so derivatives on bonds. And it was a voice trading desk. So like literally someone would call over the speakerphone at that, like there were these big speakers that like boomed out across the whole trading floor. It would be like, Jill bid, 10 million Mexico 22 bonds, and I'd go on the speaker and give them a price. And that price was like, I don't think that these jobs like still exist in this way. This was only 10 years ago, but like there was no model for this. Even there was no like certainly no AI anything telling me like what the right price should be. It was based purely on my knowledge of like how I was positioned. Almost think of it like a poker player, like how like the other players at the table, like all of the competitors at JP Morgan or Deutsche Bank or whatever, how they were positioned, which way the market was going generally, like, and you would just give a price based on that. There were just a lot of things where, frankly, I looked at it and I was like, maybe I'm crazy, but this does not feel like the future. This was also shortly after Occupy Wall Street. I don't know. I feel like some of the stuff I saw on Wall Street kind of radicalized me to a degree where I was like, this is not great. This is not a great overall system just for society in general. I mean, I'm a good capitalist, but just the concentration of power and kind of the opacity of it, and just the rampant gambling happening at these banks that purported to be. There was this famous line around the time, like the Goldman CEO came out and said, "We're doing God's work here." It's like, no, you're not. I mean, it would be kind of like, the founders of Pump Fund coming out and being like, we're doing God's work. We're facilitating capital formation. Like, guys, who are you kidding? So yeah, that was sort of some of my, I guess, emotional journey into Bitcoin.
I mean, the we're doing God's work here line, it's almost like somebody put something here about the spread of every religion in history can be considered a great marketing campaign.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
it's so interesting that even that line of like, we're doing God's work here, that's like cultivating belief in TradFi. And it's also spreading some type of gospel or message.
That is so true. Emily, I love this. Way to bring it full circle. I was going off on a rant and you just. No.
So,
yeah.
I do want to talk about like
higher authority in what you're doing.
And I also think about this a lot because right now in crypto and also the state of the world, like the amount of information that flies at us it's so fast. I saw like 3 fights on Twitter just today. And I want to take it back to when you said ancient Rome was really fragmented. And then Christianity came, and then here we have monotheism again. Yeah. And my understanding is right now, Ethereum's pretty fragmented. And the reason it got there was because Ethereum was like the world computer. We had dApps built on it. We started transacting. And then gas fees were crazy. People were really excited, but then things were starting to break. And then now we have scaling solutions, but all of these scaling solutions look like different rollups. So in this analogy, would Espresso as a sequencing layer be the Christianity?
No.
Okay.
I would say, okay, the reason I would say no to this is because I think of all of these different chains, all of these different ecosystems. So whether we're talking about L2s or whether we're talking about alternative L1s, those to me are all of the different religions. And like some of them can coexist with each other. So the super chain is an ecosystem of ecosystems, right? Like that are all built on this thing called the OP stack. And they've got Unichain, which just went live today. Shout out, very cool launch. Excited to try it out. They've got, of course,
Base,
Optimism, Base, thank you, Inc., the Kraken one. Like, interestingly, there, like, Coinbase and Kraken each have their own chains, their own sort of religions, but like somehow they can coexist within this ecosystem. Then you have religions that can't coexist. So like the example I gave earlier, Solana and Ethereum, I think it's very much the Solana perspective of like, we are here to eat your lunch. Like, we're not going to coexist with you guys. Like, we're making the right set of trade-offs. You're making the wrong set of trade-offs over in Ethereum land, and there will be one chain to rule them all. I think if I was to put like what Espresso is working on, like a lot of the other interop protocols into this metaphor, let me think about the right way to do it. I don't think that we are here to like, I don't think that we are the Christianity in this, or like the monotheistic religion, because I think that that's Solana. I almost think that we're like not really a religion at all. It's more like, it's almost more like we are like the roads or, you know, the infrastructure to connect these different fragmented parts of empire.
Did they have horses back then in ancient Rome?
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you be the horses?
Yeah, maybe we're the horses. I like that.
But
like our fundamental perspective is that you need all of these ecosystems to be able to interact pretty seamlessly. And like this is where the metaphor breaks down, because this is kind of a coordination problem, right? Of like, if your goal is to grow the economic pie of the Roman Empire, what is like the number one thing you'd invest in? Probably roads and horses, right? Like get people, I mean, if you can get there like a train, like to get people and goods and ideas from one end of it to the other more quickly. Like this is globalization, right? But the challenge with it comes that then suddenly you're asking all of these people in these disparate places to interact, to start to learn about what's going on in each other's areas of the world, and to start like competing in a way that they weren't before, because they're even just aware of each other in a way that they weren't before. And I would say that this is part of the go-to-market challenge of Espresso, or like any interop protocol, is how do you get the people worshiping the OP god and the Arbitrum god to trade with each other without that causing like some kind of conflict? So that's my like stretch of an attempt to make this metaphor work.
I mean, it is super hard to make this metaphor work, because the other thing too is the technology and the tech is constantly evolving, where when I think about religions, there is a set book or a set scripture, and it's immutable and it's there. And something else I recently learned is over in Bitcoin finance land, they can actually apparently build, I'm not technical, by the way, that's my disclaimer. So I'm actually learning a lot about the tech right now through ancient Rome and religion. So thank you, Jill.
I mean, I'm also a non-technical girly, but I moonlight one. So
this actually has been the most fun way for me to learn about crypto infra. So they should have this at conferences, I think.
Let's you can just do things, Emily. Let's do it.
I know, it's revolutionary, right? We can just do things.
Yeah.
But apparently you can build Bitcoin L2s that are also EVM compatible. And I'm just thinking about this analogy, and I'm like, wait, so is that like an airplane? So if Solana's a horse, because that's just flying right over, and now we're going from one religion, we're connecting religions that weren't ever connected, but now they can also be friends.
Totally. I mean, I actually think that a lot of this, like the modularity thing, and like this is like a very Celestia. Okay, if there was going to be a religious leader in crypto, it would be Ekram, who runs brand for Celestia. He is like, he could form his own cult if he wanted to very successfully, and you wouldn't even know it. You wouldn't even know that you'd become a part of it until it was too late. Like, he is a master at this stuff. But the Celestia team kind of coined this term not originally, of course, but like within crypto of modularity, and really made people aware of this possibility and just different way of doing development and different way of thinking about chains where you can kind of like take different pieces of it. I actually think that this is like the ultimate polytheistic approach, right? Where you can have Osiris and Augustus on the same wall of the temple. I think that that's sort of like an SVM rollup settling on Ethereum or an EVM rollup settling on Bitcoins. Like all of these things, it's like a very, modular religion, like modular software development here. And then, I mean, in terms of, again, where Solana or like coordination layers like Espresso fit into this, I think that Solana is, again, like the other end of the spectrum. They're the monotheistic religion. And yeah, someone posted, I just saw you pulled it up, like Espresso is a coordination layer fundamentally. I will take that. Yeah, the Gutenberg printing press, which unleashed a lot of challenges, like, social challenges, because again, suddenly ideas could spread and propagate, but it also unleashed, like, it was the foundation of the scientific revolution. It was the foundation then ultimately of the industrial revolution. Like, it is what catapulted us into the modern era. You need coordination across these different zones. And you could arguably say that that's ultimately what held the Roman Empire back, and maybe actually why they had to adopt like a more kind of monotheistic approach and force that upon people, is because, you can only last for so long depending on fragmentation to keep a stable equilibrium.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you bring up Ekram. I'm definitely going to shout him out and and let him know that we related him to a religious builder.
Ekram is our Augustus.
I remember he mentioned that it took about a year to build the modularity narrative, and you also need to make sure it's earned, meaning that you need to get buy-in from your partners in this case, which is usually a BD function, and also the community has to understand it, and it takes time. So to your point of like the plans are measured in centuries, in the case of crypto marketing, it's like sometimes the plans are measured in weeks, sometimes the plans get scrapped because it happens. And I feel like our time cycles in this industry are so much shorter. But something else I remember him saying was that modularity needed to have an enemy, and that was monolithic.
Yes.
So there was also some type of anchor point. So that's all super interesting because there is so many analogies here with, I guess, propaganda and marketing. And I think the two also can go hand in hand in history, even outside of ancient Rome.
I think that's spot on. And to relate that back to Roman history, I mean, for so long, the whole Roman political structure, it was very democratic, the Roman Republic, and the common enemy was kings. And so then how do you evolve? I mean, I'm curious to see if Celestia ever goes this direction, where like today, Celestia's whole thing, Nick White, who's also at Celestia, tweeted this yesterday, like, the power of Celestia is that it can support many different brands and many different ecosystems, or in our analogy, like many different religions living on top of it. But a lot of those brands do align with Celestia. Like if Celestia ever wanted to evolve into being like a more kind of full service ecosystem, or like really owning its positioning as an L1, that would be akin to like this transition from the Roman Republic, where the common enemy was kings, to becoming a king. And it's like, how do you do that sort of elegantly in a way where like no one is really going to notice or call it out, but you're like fostering it? I have no idea if this is in the works. Like probably not. This is my own imagination. But I wouldn't underestimate Ekram, the company.
So great. He's probably plotting and scheming right now as we speak.
Yes, I hope so.
Building a new category.
But it's so true what you said about like in crypto, you really have to measure these plans in centuries. I mean, we at Espresso, God love us, like we've pivoted around on product a bunch, which then means you have to pivot around in terms of like your positioning, product marketing, and all of that. And we kind of like did this most recently, I would say last autumn, so like September, October period. And I remember all sort of DevCon period around November, everyone on the team being like, oh, I feel like people still don't know that we're not a shared sequencer anymore. That was kind of the original product, was this shared sequencer thing. Like, we still are related to sequencing. We still solve a similar problem as we were doing then. But we talk about ourselves as a confirmation layer now, and it's important but subtle differences. But I would be like, you guys, we've been talking about this amongst ourselves for like 5 weeks. Like, we can't expect the whole world to know it yet. Like, you want to balance it, right? Like, you want to be pushing the envelope of what's possible, of course. But yeah, you also, if you're going to compare your marketing to the Christians, you got to remember it took them 300 years.
So, I mean, let's talk about that a little bit more. So Espresso you're looking at it as a coordination layer. And I remember hearing on, I think it was a podcast you did with Diana on Rehash about 4 months ago, where you said that infrastructure is not ready yet to support all of the apps. Did I butcher that, or was
no?
that...
I think that that's true. I think that there's a pendulum that swings back and forth in crypto, where you have all of these new apps surge, whether it's DeFi Summer or whether it's NFT Mania or the original one kind of on Ethereum with like CryptoKitties. And then you see all the ways in which the infrastructure breaks. And then you have to go through usually a bear market period of building out the infrastructure. And then the infrastructure makes leaps and bounds. And then you see all of these new applications surge. But it's very easy when you're in one zone or the other. Like, for a while there, last year, I would say in particular, everyone was sort of screaming, where are the apps? Like, why are we just building the infrastructure?
Yeah.
It's very easy to say that when you're not seeing new apps. Similarly, though, when the new apps are just on the ascendancy, it's very easy to forget that there's all of this work still yet to be done on the infra side. So I would say that the stuff that we're working on with Espresso, it's like, I try not to talk about us just as an interop product, because interop exists. Like, I dunk on interop, but the process of bridging using a cross is actually pretty good today. But there's all of these things going on under the surface. There's all of these risks that exist under the surface, where like the cross bridge, like the entities who are actually facilitating the bridging, like they're trusting the word of the sequencer, that the sequencer is not going to rug pull them. And like, maybe that's okay if it's the base sequencer because it's run by like a regulated US company, but it's probably not okay if it's some brand new roll up running their own centralized sequencer. And so like, that's what we're solving, right? Is, these kind of cracks that exist in the foundation. But again, you don't actually see them or feel them until you put enough weight on them. So
it really makes me, I reference that cake model a lot. Have you seen it, where it's all the different layers of the blockchain?
Totally.
So we only have 2 minutes, and I'm wondering if you're able to tell me in the next 2 minutes. So Espresso is a coordination layer. What is the ideal future you're building for? Because it sounds like you're also needing to build based on the landscape of all the religions and how their religions are evolving, and how you need to kind of fix this fragmentation. So what is the dream state of when Espresso is fully like, all the roads are built out essentially?
The dream state is that it all feels seamless, that you can be interacting between 2 smart contracts on 2 totally different chains, even L1s. Like, we're starting within Ethereum, but even 2 different L1s, and it just feels like all one chain. Now, the challenge, as you rightly point out, is how to do this in a way that is not threatening to all of these religions that exist, because we need buy-in from all of these religions. Like, we can't just go around plundering and saying like, all right, we are enforcing our dominance onto you. Like, we need buy-in from all of the different roll-ups or all of the different chains. And so doing that in a way that is like palatable and making sure it doesn't erode their own brand and moat and value capture and all of these things is the big challenge of it. Like, don't get me wrong, the technical side, like actually building the damn thing is also extremely hard. But as with everything in life, it all comes down ultimately, I think, to coordination. But I think that we're on the way there, and I think that it's good and healthy that monotheistic or monolithic chains exist to create pressure on all of these Ethereum chains to say like, okay, no, we actually do have to work together on some level. I think that that's a very healthy market dynamic that
Preach.
is playing out, and
yeah, and also in coordination, technology makes it a lot easier, just both through
Yeah.
communication, like what we're able to do right now, and also the fact that you are building a coordination layer between all of these different blockchains.
Yeah.
Jill, thank you so much. I had so much fun, and I did not realize we'd be able to chat through religion throughout the whole time.
Can I come back?
Learning about tech. Yeah, I could definitely go on longer. I'd love to do a part 2, but thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Emily. Loved
I
it.
will end this. Okay.